Well, hello everyone. I am Dale Delbridge, Benchmark Realty, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and it is Friday, February the 19th, 2021, and we have had some exciting things going on. We've had sort of a 1 in 10 year, I don't know what the event of it is, but we got freezing in Texas, snow in Texas, and we've had ice through Middle Tennessee in some parts, and other parts got lots and lots of snow. There's something I want to talk about, and it is this. There's a picture floating around the internet that people have used showing what looks like heat pumps, and they have snow on the outside, the enclosure of the outside unit, and people are saying, well, you might have a heat pump failure. You need to call us. You see this? You might need to call us. Well, the very first question that I would ask, being as I used to, do some design engineering work, is it weather or is it a failure? Our roads didn't fail because we had ice and snow on them. Our roofs didn't fail necessarily because we had ice and snow on it. The question is, was your roof leaking before the snow or not? Okay, well, has your heat pump been working? I know we got down to some cold weather. We got down to some single digits and that taxed them a little bit. But the question is it weather or did your unit not work? Because the pictures they're showing are snow on the outside of the unit. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. Depends on where you were. Now, I'll show you a picture of my heat pump, and it's not obstructed, and there's a lot of reasons for that. The reason I say that is, do you know how a heat pump works? And I'm going to go into a little bit of this. This might be a long one. I expect it will be a long status chat today, but there's something I want you to understand. Okay, when you turn a stove eye on, or a hob, or what you want to call it, a burner, to heat up a pan of water, heat only moves from hot to cold. Hot, cold. Okay, it doesn't move, nothing, cold does not move, heat moves. So when we heat a pot of water, we're burning gas, we're burning some kind of fuel or electricity, and we're putting heat into that pan, and because there's a temperature differential, good for me to say, right? Temperature differential, it's going to heat that water up. The heat's going to move from the hot eye into the pan to water, and it's going to do that, and some into the room. Now, an air conditioner, let's start with old Willis Carrier. An air conditioner moves heat from hot to cold. That's science. That's physics. That's the way this stuff works. Okay? Now, how does it work? Well, I'm going to use some round numbers so we can do the mental math together. And if this old guy can do the math, you ought to be able to. And they're not hard and fast numbers. It depends on who designed what, but they'll give you an idea. Okay. In air conditioning mode, your unit is heating the world. It's cooling your house, but it's heating the world. Now, how does it do that? Well, let's say we have a 70-degree temperatures on our thermostat. We want a 70-degree house. Our area senses that it's not 70 degrees anymore, and it wants some cool, so it calls for cool. The unit kicks on, and we produce cool. But how do we get cool into the building, into the air? Well, if you're not moving air, you're not moving heat. So what we do is we push that warm return air over a colder surface, which in most cases is going to be an evaporator coil, aluminum, copper tube with aluminum fins. It's going to push, and we have to have that coil inside the house colder than the air we're moving over it. If they're the same temperature, we're not moving heat. Even if you are moving air, you're not moving heat. They have to be colder. You have to have a temperature differential. And for this explanation, I'm just going to stick with a 15-degree design temp. So if we have a 70-degree day or a 70-degree house and we want cooler air and we have a 15-degree design temperature, what's 15 from 70? Well, that's 60, 55. So we have to run that coil at 55 degrees. Could be colder, could be warmer, depending on the design point. But we have to have a colder coil than our room if we're going to take heat from hot, which is the room, into the refrigerant to dump it outside. Now, the same thing, we have to then be hotter outside for the air, the ambient air out there, to be cooler than our refrigerant, our system. Our system has to be hotter. Let's say it's 15 degrees. Now maybe its design was 10 or maybe 12 even, or 7 or 5, depends on who designed it, but it has to have a temperature differential to pick up that heat, or to release that heat rather. So the outside air has to be cooler. Well, if it's a 70-degree day inside and a 70-degree outside, and we're running a system, then our outside temperature has to be cooler. So what would be, if I use a 15-degree temperature differential, our coil would have to operate then at 70, 80, 85. Not hard to do. Well, a question often comes up, oh man, it's just so ironic. I can't believe it. The hottest day in the year, my air conditioner died. Isn't that ironic or coincidental? No, it's science. Science does it. This is the way this stuff works. Now, to be quite honest, you say, well, I don't know what died during the hot. Well, it's working harder. Just like you have to sweat harder and work harder in hot days, and the way your body works and all these things, your car, your heat, anything gets stressed, heat stresses something, and particularly with air conditioner, because temperature and pressure are related. And we're going to use that in just when we go to heat pump mode. Because if we're operating normal and we know we have to be cooler on our inside coil for air conditioner and hotter outside, in order to get those temperatures to track in an air conditioner, we have to pump more refrigerant into this physically limited space. We have to push more poundage of gas into that condenser in order to get that operating point higher, because pressure and temperature are related. So to get a higher temperature outside, to get to 85 degrees, I have to pump it more gas into that space to get that temperature. But what happens when we have a 100-degree day and I still need to maintain that 15-degree design temperature across that coil? I have to be operating that coil at 115 degrees, which means I'm really pushing even more stuff into that coil to get it at higher pressure. Okay, because in air conditioner mode, we're heating the world. Now in heat pump mode, we reverse it. In fact, call it reverse mode. We often have what's called a reversing valve. And that reversing valve turns that gas around. All the piping remains. There's no magic pixies running out there replumbing everything. They have a thing called a changeover valve, which switches from heat to cool. And what it does is the compressor sees the same thing. It sees only a system. It sees a suction line and a discharge line. But where that line goes, it switches coils. So now in heat pump mode, we are refrigerating the world. And that can be a challenge when the world is cold, okay? Now, what we're doing is, again, we move heat from hot to cold, and pressure and temperature are related. So on a normal 70-degree day outside, if we were in heat pump mode, reverse mode, we're 70 degrees, and in order to pick that heat up, just like an air conditioner, we have to be colder than the air, because it moves from hot to cold. So if, again, could be 5, could be 7, could be 12, could be 10, but I'm going to use 15 degrees as the temperature the design point operation to work at 15 degrees below ambient. So if I'm at 70-degree air outside, my coil is going to work like the air conditioner. It's going to be 55 degrees. I have to operate that coil at 55 degrees, and that works great in those temperate zones. But we're seeing a lot of people with issues in places like Texas and these other places that may not have this kind of weather. And quite honestly, we don't know where these pictures that are floating all over Facebook, Twitter, and all these places come from. We don't know the condition. We don't know where they're at. We don't know the weather. But if you show me the side of a box and it's snowpacked on the outside of the enclosure, that doesn't necessarily suggest you had an equipment failure. One way to tell is, has your heat pump been working on, say, 25-degree weather that we had when it snowed here in Tennessee? If it's been working when it wasn't raining and it hasn't frozen up, then chances are you're seeing weather, not necessarily equipment failure. Now, the equipment may have failed because of the weather, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a permanent failure. Maybe you just need to go out there and keep it from building up, maybe knock the snow off. Because it can snow hard enough, it can certainly sleet and freezing rain hard enough that when it's in, what are we doing in heat pump mode? We're air conditioning the world. So it's already cold, and then we're dropping freezing rain if we drop it at a high enough rate and we got enough of it, we can actually ice up and close off the louvers, the holes in the side of the unit if it has louvers, and check, see how many of them that they show you the picture of have louvers instead of, you know, a wire grate protecting the outside of the unit. That might be another clue. It can physically obstruct and stop air. And what happens if you don't have any air movement? Then you don't have any hope of moving any heat when you're using a coil. Now we have what we call radiating heat, you know, like you heat a piece of metal, that's hot, it's not got air across it, but you put it on your hand, it'll burn you, won't you? That's a different type of heat. So we have a condition where it looks like we have some weather-related indicators that don't necessarily mean your heat pump failed. But how does a heat pump work? Well, the post I saw was talking about, well, you need to go switch your thermostat over. Your thermostat, unless it's an antique, is probably going to be smarter than we are in how it operates. It knows what it's supposed to do, and it only has one job, and do that. So what do we have in a heat pump? We're air conditioning the world. And remember, to move heat, we have to move it from hot to cold. So if it's, say, 40 degrees instead of 70, and we have that same 15-degree temperature differential, what do we have? Well, 40 degrees minus 10 is 30 degrees, minus 5 is 25 degrees. So your coil, in order to be 15 degrees colder than the outside air, to pick that heat up and put it in the refrigerant and run around in the system, we have to run a 25-degree evaporator. Now what happens to water, to that sweat that evaporator is going to do when water hits 32 degrees? Well, it freezes and it ices up. It frosts up. You seen those refrigerators don't have frost free? You know how they build up ice inside of your chest freezer or whatever? That's because it's not melting off. It has to have a chance to melt off and an amount of energy to do that. Well, normally, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say we don't try to defrost the coil when we're trying to push it down to a lower temperature to run. So most of the time I think you'll find we defrost when the unit's not running, because we need to melt that sweat back off that froze up. And that's not an unusual thing. We call that heat defrost heater. And if they fail, your unit can ice up. And you'll probably see it icing before we hit sleeting, freezing rain, and snowy weather. If we're below below 40 temperature, 45 or 45, 35, wherever your design might be, it'll freeze up. Now there's something else that goes on with a heat pump in particular that we don't normally see with gas units and stuff like that. We have to have what we call staged heat, because pressure and temperature are related. Just like in the summertime when we're heating the outdoors with our air conditioner and we have to drive that pressure and temperature up, that stresses our unit, because our volume of our coils is fixed, our surface area that we're blowing across, that system is fixed in volume. In order to get that lower and lower and lower temperature on the evaporator, so we have 15 degrees difference between the outside air and it for that refrigerant to pick up the heat, we have to drive a lower and lower temperature. And to get that lower and lower temperature, we have to have a lower and lower pressure. And if the volume's fixed and the pressure goes down, there's only one way to do that, which is to put less stuff in that volume. So you're moving less pounds of refrigerant when it's cold in a heat pump than you are when it's warm. So your BTUs go, they drop on you. You just lose efficiency. But if you're in a temperate zone, like, northern Alabama, top of Mississippi, Texas, Oklahoma, right through there, where you don't have that many freezy days, then that's not so bad because you work in that high efficiency zone. But when it drops below about 40 degrees, 35 degrees, somewhere in that range, your heat pump's going to lose its efficiency. And it's going to lose not just its efficiency, it's going to lose capacity. So what happens when you're losing more heat through the walls, ceiling, and floors and other parts and doors and windows and all that wonderful stuff, then you can put in your house, you get colder. I mean, that's, again, not genius, science. See? So when that capacity of your heat pump starts to drop off because it's colder outside and it's having to run so much less mass flow through the system, we have to come up with some way to interject more heat into the house, else that unit will never cut off. And if the unit never cuts off, on average, they're probably not going to defrost. So what do we have? Heat pumps normally have an electric radiant heat source built into the inside of the house, inside the unit. And we'll call, like say, let's just say we have what I call helper heat. Now, the thermostat will call it auxiliary, but I think of it as helper heat. In which case the thermostat doesn't necessarily know what temperature it is outside or need to know what temperature it is outside. It just needs to know what set point you want it to operate at. Let's say we're trying for a 70-degree house with a heat pump. Okay, well, as long as the thermostat responds to temperature, not outside conditions for the most part, there may be some out there that do. So it just knows that when I tick below 70 degrees, I'll call for heat. My compressor runs, and if it's able to keep up, if it's producing more heat inside and we're losing through the walls and windows and doors and all that, floors and stuff, then we'll get back up to 70 degrees, we'll cut off. But what happens when we lose so much of our capacity because it's cold outside? Now we hit temperature to cut on below 70 and we're not keeping up. And so the temperature drops. And if it gets, let's make up a number, say 2 degrees below. We'll call that second stage heat or auxiliary heat or helper heat. It falls down below, that electric heat kicks on, say at 68 degrees, and we warm up. If we got enough heat, we'll shoot up, we'll hit our set point, we'll cut off and give our outside unit a chance to defrost off and get caught up. Okay? Now, that's if the unit's not working right, we freeze from the inside out, not the outside in. Okay? Now what happens in a lot of cases is a heat pump will get so inefficient or get so cold that the oils turn to jelly or whatever, or we're going to actually move so little refrigerant around, depending on, again, who designed the compressor, whether or not we're actually cooling our compressor. The unit may get too cold for the specs of that unit and actually cut the compressor off, and we have no stage 1 heat compressor, and we have only that first helper heat. Well, what happens when that helper heat doesn't have the compressor to help it? Well, then we really lose heat and we kick into what we might call stage 3 heat or emergency heat. And in emergency heat, then in that case, if the compressor's not helping, we are all on pure electric radiant heat, just like you have one of these little box heaters that you put at your feet at the office when it's cold. And that's when your electric bill does this right here. Your meter just runs around like a mad hatter, just spins like a whirling dervish, because you're all electric heat. And the electric heat in resistive radiant heat is not as effective and as efficient as if we're powering a motor to move the refrigerant. So, because we're just moving it, we're not creating the heat in a refrigeration cycle. We're just moving it. In an electric heater, it's converting it from electricity into heat. And so the efficiencies are not there. So the thermostat, a normal heat pump thermostat that's been made in maybe the last 20 years is generally smart enough to have those stages of heat. You don't necessarily have to go in there and move it to emergency heat. Some of the old mechanical thermostats were that way. You had heat pump and then helper heat, and if you got cold enough, you go in there, flip it on the emergency heat, bring it on. And you can manually kick emergency heat on if you want in most thermostats by moving it over. But also most thermostats are smart enough to do that. And it does it not by looking at the outside world, it looks at set point. Now, where do people mess up in the wintertime with heat pumps? Well, we all want to be energy efficient, right? We want to save that dollar. Well, with a heat pump, as I just described, that thermostat, if it's just a typical thermostat, it knows if it drops down 2 degrees to that second set point, it knows that it thinks that the compressor is not keeping up. And so it kicks on that helper heat. And if it drops down 2 more degrees, it thinks the helper heat is not sufficient, kicks on all resistive heat. Well, what can happen in some cases? Well, if you happen to be one of those people, like me, that sets a real high setback at night, if you try to warm that up, when that set point changes, say, from 60 degrees to 70 degrees, that's 10 degrees differential. That's probably going to kick on your emergency heat and your helper heat, and it's going to make your electric bill go way up because you're not making use of the inherent efficiency of not creating heat, but relocating heat. Does that make sense to you? So in the wintertime, with a gas unit, might be a little bit different because it's going to take so much gas to make the BTUs you need. But with a heat pump and a multi-stage system like that, if you just keep that within that normal temperature range and the compressor is capable of keeping up with your heat demands, it'll run very efficiently. But if you're doing severe setbacks at night, you may be running resistive heat for most of your heating. It actually may be using most of that pure electric heat along with just a little bit of augmentation from the compressor during those regeneration periods in time. So all I'm saying is snow on the outside of a unit indicates a weather event, does not necessarily indicate a failure of a system. It all depends. Now, how would you know? If you're seeing severe icing during non-precipitating days, that may be an indication that your unit's not working. Also, if you have a unit that is too small, it may not be malfunctioning, it just may be too small to keep up, and so it may be you might have a size related issue. That is a design and install issue, not a unit failure issue. But remember, ice on the road didn't mean that the road failed. It just means that we had freezing condition. It was cold enough to do that. And again, on outside the box, that's something you might look at. Did it work fine when it was 25 degrees and not sleeting and raining and snowing? And now when it rains and sleets and snows, it does freeze up. Because remember, in heat pump mode, you're air conditioning the world. So the air that's being pulled across and blown across that coil is already colder than the air you already have. And if it gets too cold, and water hits it, water will freeze when it gets below 32 degrees. Now, what do you say we do the regulatory thing that I have to do every week? Hello, I'm Dale Delbridge of Benchmark Realty, Murfreesboro, Tennessee. If you are currently unrepresented and would like to know how to compare up to 3 properties side by side and room by room, then go over to my new YouTube channel, Call Dale to Sell. That's one L in Dale, no spaces. Watch the demo on Real Scout and then call me and we'll set up your exclusive ad-free account today. Now that we've sat through both my long, I hope it wasn't rambling, it's just I hope it helps you understand that a little snow on a heat pump does not mean it failed. Might not. You're going to know the best about it if you understand how heat pumps work and you know the conditions that were going on. Now, I have the numbers from last week and this week. Let's get to them. Last week, 2/12/2021, we had 9796 opportunities in the Real Scout system. Again, if you don't have your Real Scout account, set it up with me, ad-free. I'm easy to deal with, easy to get along with. I'll set you up, and if you tell me where you want to be, I'll set your stuff up for you. If you want to do it yourself, tell me you want to do it yourself, you can do it. I'm flexible. We also had 4690 in the under contract still showing, and we see that we're continuing that same trend that we had last week and the week before and the week before and the week before. We're dropping what's available and we're increasing our people holding on, still showing, still marketing, but holding on to that contract. And we had a 48% ratio between those two numbers. This week, 2/19/21, we had 9263, which is a further drop off of the availables in the Real Scout system. And we had 4917 in the under contract still showing, those being holding on, and it continued the same exact trend. The availables coming down, the holding on is going up, and the ratio this week was 53%. Now, a lot of that could be weather related, simply because people couldn't get out and about to market homes and to show homes and to see homes, And that may be why some of the stuff, the numbers go up. But it's also wintertime, and spring's going to come. It always has. I have a high degree of confidence spring's still going to show up this year just like it has every other year. So if you got a home and you want to sell it, call Del to sell. And if you want to buy a home, call Del to buy. And your first step of buying a home is getting into the RealTrac system, so you can not the RealTrac, the Real Scouts. Well, RealTracs do it too, but Real Scouts a little easier to deal with because it has, what is that? Artificial intelligence, and learns what you want if you'll tell it, and it starts to narrow your choices for you. It's a pretty smart system, and it'll save you time and effort. And you can see the best ones first, and if you're bored, you can sit on the couch and look at some others you might not be interested in. But if you're just in a quick, down and dirty, quick look at, Real Scout will filter them for you based upon what you tell it. And who has Real Scout? Well, Del does. And it's also, I think, ad-free last I looked. So, except for my ads, that's the only ones you had to put up with. So won't you call Del to sell, call Del to buy, and hit me up. We'll set you an up account, let you be searching and looking around. Even if you just want to see what the market is doing, you can keep up with it that way. Thank you. Have a great weekend.